Interrogation room, Liège Police Department, October 16th, 1936. The air was thick with tension. A black handbag with a silver clasp sat silently on the table. Inside, a few old pieces of jewelry and an unsent letter. There was also a small package, neatly wrapped in newspaper, containing a light brown powder. Tests would later confirm it was digitalis, a dangerous compound known to affect the heart, often undetectable in small doses. The woman carrying that handbag was Marie Alexandrine Becker. She would later be known as the Black Widow. 59 years old, a resident of Liège. To her neighbors, she seemed like a devoted friend to elderly women, a simple, approachable old lady. In working-class neighborhoods, those who were sick or lived alone often felt reassured by the sight of Marie in their parlor. She had a gentle voice. She cleaned, she listened. She stayed overnight when needed. On the morning of October 12th, 1936, Marie was stopped by the police on the street. She was on her way to visit another ailing woman. That woman would become the 17th person linked to Marie. To many in town, Marie was just a lonely woman. She had survived a war, endured personal failures, and grew dependent on both affection and money. But to others, she was the embodiment of silent manipulation, a killer who used kindness as her weapon. In the 1930s Belgium, the country was still reeling from crisis. Older women had few options beyond relying on others. Yet Marie always found someone to depend on. And if you were one of those aging friends sipping warm tea made by Marie, what would you see in her eyes? A friend? Or a hand quietly guiding you toward death? Marie Alexandrine Becker was born on July 14th, 1879. Her hometown was Wasmont, a remote village in the province of Landen, Belgium. She grew up at the end of the 19th century, during a time when the divide between rural and urban life was becoming more pronounced. Belgium was transitioning from an agricultural economy to an industrial one. But in rural areas like Wasmont, life remained harsh. Marie's family belonged to the working class. They lived off the land and couldn't afford to send their children to school. Women in the countryside were hardly valued at the time. Many girls were forced to leave school early to work. In such conditions, Marie soon revealed a strong desire to escape. She didn't receive formal schooling. Still, she taught herself how to read, write, and do basic arithmetic with the help of a local priest. From a young age, she showed remarkable determination. Her circumstances may have limited her, but Marie never let go of the hope that she could change her fate. At age 16, she left Wasmont for Liège, a bustling industrial city. She lived with her aunt and found work at a rope shop. City life opened up a whole new world. There, she learned how to interact with customers, observe people, and gradually develop social skills. To Marie, Liège was a gateway to freedom. Its fast-paced rhythm helped her break away from the constraints of village life. That environment shaped her ability to communicate and influence others. Later in life, these skills would become key to a series of actions that still raise questions to this day. At the age of 17, Marie met her first husband during a local festival. The marriage seemed promising at first, but happiness quickly faded when her husband left. Alone in the city, Marie was forced to fend for herself. She turned to sewing, starting with the smallest, most basic tasks. With skill and determination, she secured a position at a high-end dressmaking shop in Liège. Starting as a seamstress, Marie gradually became the fitting assistant. She built a reputation for her craftsmanship and friendly manner. Customers liked her. Over time, Marie secured a respectable place among the city's middle class. It was a major step up from her modest beginnings. In 1905, Marie met Charles Becker, a wealthy man who owned a lumber mill. They married, and Marie moved near the family-run sawmill. But married life was not smooth. The Becker family had children from previous marriages. Marie often clashed with Leontine, the wife of Charles's adult son. Though she tried to remain cordial, she felt pushed aside. A quiet sense of isolation grew inside her. In a society that valued youth and appearances, Marie understood that a woman like her, past the typical age for marriage, had to redefine her own worth by any means necessary. After Charles's death in 1932, Marie returned to dressmaking. She opened a small sewing workshop at home. Thanks to her skill and her way with people, she quickly regained the trust of clients. Before long, she found financial success. Marie became wealthy. This marked the most stable period in Marie's life. A woman who had risen from poverty. She had a good reputation, financial security, and loyal customers. But from that very success, something else began to grow, quietly and dangerously out of control. Just when it seemed Marie had entered the second half of her life in peace, she was confronted with a crisis more devastating than anything she had ever faced. In 1929, the Great Depression struck. It brought down the Belgian economy. The fashion shop Marie had built from scratch couldn't survive the wave of collapse. Customers vanished, and debts piled up. She lost everything. Her reputation and hard-earned credibility crumbled with it. The shock was the greatest since the death of her husband, Charles Becker, in 1932. It pushed Marie into a deep state of helplessness. A woman once proud of her independence and skill now had to accept a painful truth. All she had worked for was gone. After the crisis, Marie lived alone in an empty house. Business partners left. Invitations from high society, once eager to include her, slowly disappeared. Those who once admired her turned away. They left Marie alone with a suffocating silence. Only the ticking of the clock remained. The house that once echoed with laughter and guests had become a hollow shell, trapping her loneliness within its walls. Marie was now past 50. She began to feel the harsh reality society imposed on older women. She was no longer the center of attention. Instead, she became someone to be pitied, a fading figure in the eyes of those who only valued youth and novelty. The sense of becoming invisible ate away at her thoughts. It forced her to confront a bitter realization. She was being forgotten, but life's harshness had yet to release its grip on Marie. In 1928, just before the global economic crisis struck, Marie met Maximilian Hayo. He was 20 years younger than her. Despite the age gap, the intimate relationship with Maximilian gave Marie a sense of being loved, a feeling she had long yearned for. Marie supported him financially. She placed all her hopes on this romance, as if it were the only escape from her loneliness. For the first time in years, Marie felt alive again. The death of Maximilian, later becoming a focus of police suspicion, left a deep void. In her despair, Marie turned to Lambert Beyer, a dignified-looking man known for his womanizing. Though fully aware of his reputation, she still plunged into a relationship riddled with lies and jealousy. Lambert pulled Marie into a cycle of emotional dependence. Within it, she could no longer tell right from wrong, nor could she distinguish who to trust and who to let go. Marie's mental state began to unravel. Once a woman who controlled everything, she now moved like a puppet of her own emotions. Her judgment grew increasingly fragile, and it was from here that her growing instability began to evolve into something quietly dangerous. After a series of personal and financial shocks, Marie Becker re-emerged in the Liège community. She returned with a new image, a kind-hearted middle-aged woman devoted to caring for the elderly and the sick. She often visited older women, bringing gentle words and thoughtful gestures. Her habit of delivering pastries and tea made her quickly endearing. At times, she even offered to spend the night to help with care. Soon enough, she had built the image of a devoted friend. The community initially welcomed her warmly. Everyone believed Marie was a charming woman, genuinely caring for the vulnerable. No one questioned the real intentions behind her polite smile. But then, unexpected deaths began to occur. Several elderly women, after growing close to Marie, passed away under unclear circumstances. Doctors often listed the causes as heart failure, old age, or general weakness. Yet there was one detail that stirred whispers among the neighbors. Marie was almost always present in the victims' final hours, or the first to discover their bodies. After each incident, she often inherited small sums of money, jewelry, or personal belongings. While none of the inheritances were large, the pattern became noticeable. Rumors spread, but no one dared to openly accuse Marie. She always appeared at the funerals, visibly grieving, like a loyal friend who had stayed until the very end. In early 1935, a housemaid recalled seeing Marie quietly open Madame Delvine's medicine cabinet. That woman would later become one of the victims. When questioned, Marie simply smiled and said the lady had a headache and she was looking for painkillers. The maid hesitated, but let it go. It wasn't until much later that she reported the incident to the police. By then, it was far too late. Marie became increasingly skilled at controlling her victims. She would offer to stay overnight, prepare their meals, and manage their medication. At times, she even got involved in organizing their belongings. Some people started to feel uneasy. They sensed that Marie's presence could be intrusive. There was a quiet form of control, hidden behind her gentle demeanor. Yet, because she remained polite and attentive, suspicions were often dismissed. A few families grew wary, but no one took action. They lacked evidence, and perhaps they simply didn't want to believe that someone so kind could be hiding something so sinister. To the families of the deceased, she would often say, "I was only trying to help. If kindness is met with doubt, perhaps I should stop." In 1936, an especially suspicious death prompted police involvement. Marie was questioned as authorities looked for clues surrounding the unexplained passing of a woman who had once been close to her. But due to a lack of concrete evidence, Marie was released. After that, she became more cautious, but didn't stop. She continued to seek out new acquaintances. Her ability to conceal her intentions became sharper. And while she kept up the appearance of being a caring friend, the doubts surrounding the deaths lingered quietly, waiting to erupt. In 1936, the investigation into Marie Alexandrine Becker entered a decisive phase. Authorities began to suspect that the string of deaths connected to her was not a coincidence. To build the case, police focused on tracing Marie's behavior through her social connections and financial transactions. They investigated local banks and notaries in Liège. Investigators found small amounts of money transferred into Marie's account from several victims shortly before their deaths. They also examined pharmacy records. Marie regularly purchased medicines containing digitalis, a substance that could be dangerous if misused. Though seemingly minor, these transactions revealed a deliberate pattern. It stood in stark contrast to the image of the kind-hearted woman Marie had presented. Marie did not act at random. She targeted elderly women living alone, often former acquaintances or women she had met during community gatherings. Building relationships, offering care, earning trust, all were part of a calculated plan. This was no longer simple kindness. It was a carefully orchestrated strategy. The community had once welcomed Marie with trustful eyes. They allowed her to care for their aging parents, aunts, and uncles. No one suspected a thing, yet within that trust, death had quietly taken root. And soon the doubts began to surface. A careless moment led Marie to slip up. During a conversation at the home of Mrs. Castadot, a longtime friend, she casually suggested, "If a husband gets too troublesome, just a small dose will do." The comment, veiled in a friendly tone, startled Mrs. Castadot. She immediately reported the incident to police on October 15, 1936, providing a key lead that triggered the arrest. The very next day, October 16th, Marie was apprehended at Mrs. Lamy's home, where she was reportedly preparing to carry out a similar act. During the subsequent search, police discovered a vial of digitalis, carefully hidden in a kitchen cupboard. They also found persona belongings of past victims, including gold rings and embroidered handkerchiefs. As the investigation progressed, authorities employed prolonged interrogation techniques to break Marie's composure. They presented receipts for medication purchases and cross-referenced witness statements from those who had seen her removing items from the victims' homes. Marie, maintaining a confident demeanor, repeatedly denied the accusations, insisting everything was merely a coincidence. However, forensic experts were brought in to re-examine the autopsy reports of several victims. They confirmed the unusual presence of a toxic compound in the bodies of at least 3 individuals. This finding strengthened the case that Marie had administered poison systematically. In one of Marie's drawers, police found an old black leather notebook. Inside was a list of elderly women living alone around Liège, annotated with notes on their personal circumstances, health conditions, and addresses. Investigators referred to it as a suspicion list, each name seemingly evaluated before becoming a potential target. But if all of this was cloaked in kindness, where is the line between helping and manipulating? Was the community too trusting? Or was Marie simply too skilled for anyone to ever suspect her? In 1938, the trial of Marie Alexandrine Becker took place in Liège, Belgium, under a heavy and somber atmosphere. The case drew intense public attention. The courtroom was packed. Reporters scribbled down every detail. Locals whispered among themselves. Relatives of the victims sat quietly, carrying the weight of their grief. The press described Marie as a troubling enigma, a woman once admired, now standing in the dock. She entered the courtroom with composure, dressed neatly, her eyes sharp, her smile faint. She looked more like someone attending a performance than a defendant on trial. The proceedings centered around a tense confrontation between the prosecutor and the defense attorney. The prosecutor delivered severe accusations. Marie was charged with 11 counts of murder, 5 counts of attempted murder, as well as theft and document forgery. All the victims were elderly women, living alone, whom Marie had cared for. After their deaths, she had always been the one to benefit. The key evidence came from post-mortem examinations. Traces of digitalis, a toxic substance extracted from the foxglove plant, were found in the victims' bodies. The prosecutor argued that Marie had used her pharmaceutical knowledge to carry out the poisonings with precision. She had deliberately targeted isolated, trusting women in order to seize their assets. Additional evidence included questionable legal documents. Some wills bore suspicious signatures, and then there was the testimony of Madame Castadot, who recounted Marie's suggestion to use poison to get rid of her husband. The prosecutor's closing remarks were chilling. Marie, he claimed, was a cunning manipulator. She exploited the trust of the vulnerable and turned kindness into a weapon to control life and death. They also argued that the series of 11 deaths was no coincidence, but rather a calculated pattern carried out with cold determination. The defense attorney strongly objected, arguing that the charges lacked direct evidence. They emphasized that no witnesses had seen Marie commit any act of murder, and the deaths could have been due to illness or old age. The defense portrayed Marie as a devoted woman who cared for her friends without seeking any benefit, and that the small inheritances were merely tokens of gratitude from those she had helped. They questioned the fairness of convicting an elderly woman who had endured personal losses based solely on suspicion. However, the prosecutor countered by pointing out the repeated pattern in the deaths, stressing that such coincidences were statistically implausible. They urged the jury to view Marie as a danger to society, someone who had used trust as a means to commit wrongdoing. On the day of the verdict, the court found Marie guilty of 11 serious offenses related to the deaths of the victims, along with other charges, and issued the highest sentence allowed by law. However, since Belgium did not enforce capital punishment, she received a life sentence. Public reaction in Liège was explosive. Many were still shocked that a woman once so beloved could be connected to such a string of events. The victims' families remained haunted by the thought that their loved ones had placed their trust in the wrong hands. The case left a lasting scar on Belgian society. People became more cautious toward those who called themselves caretakers. Legal procedures concerning inheritance and guardianship of the elderly were tightened. But trust, the most precious thing that had been stolen, was not so easily restored. Psychologically, the case touched on a profound anxiety, the inner contradictions of human nature. Marie was not a cruel person from the start. She had tried to overcome poverty, had endured personal loss and failure, but in her attempt to regain a sense of control, she chose a destructive path. Her mindset revealed that the need for recognition, when distorted, can push someone beyond moral boundaries. When society turned its back, when age made her feel invisible, Marie began to manipulate others as a way of proving she still existed. But what drives an ordinary person to cross an ethical line? Is it the pressure, the isolation, the fear of being forgotten that pushed her, and perhaps anyone, into the shadows? Today, the name Marie Becker is rarely spoken, yet her case file still appears in law, forensic, and criminal psychology courses in Belgium. Because to this day, no one has been able to answer the final question: was Marie a cold-hearted criminal, or the tragic consequence of a society that had no place left for the powerless?